So my name is Joe Guadagno. Most people call me Joe G because my last name is kind of hard to pronounce. As Mahesh and Magnus mentioned, I am a director of technology at Quicken Loans. We're going to kind of walk through, if you want to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or anything, here's all the contact information. I'm also on Twitch at J Guadagno, where I stream 3 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, covering all kinds of topics. You can find out more at my GitHub repo at github.com/jguadagno or my website. So we're here to talk about Azure. So as I started to rearrange this talk, I gave it a couple of years ago, and a lot has changed since then. I started thinking about talking about all of the different resources that there are in Azure, and then realized there are way too many resources available in Azure, especially for a 45-minute talk that will most likely be cut down to 30 minutes because I'm at the end of the day and conferences tend to not run on time. So I tweaked the talk a little bit. We're going to kind of cover taking a basic .NET application, which has an API and an MVC portion to it. Then we're going to publish that to the cloud, and we'll cover Azure Web Services, Azure App Service, Azure SQL, and if we have time at the end, Azure Blob Storage. And just to show you how easy it is to get in. I know you see a lot of talks, and especially if you're watching anyone from Microsoft or Amazon, it's always those quick hello world apps. They right click and 3 seconds later you have 700 deployed VMs. I'm going to take you a little step back and give you something hopefully a little bit more realistic. So as I said, this is a lap around Azure. It's really a partial lap. We're not doing a full marathon. We're not going to run 26 miles. And luckily, we're not going to run at all unless you're on a treadmill while you're watching this. We're just going to exercise your mind with this. So we're going to start off with creating 2 app services. So we're going to be able to publish a web app and then publish an API to it. After we do that, we're going to publish a SQL database with it. This application requires a SQL backend. It doesn't have to be SQL Server. It could be SQLite. It could be anything, but we're going to publish it to SQL. Then if time allows, we're going to use something called storage accounts. That the application we're working on is a context application to manage, first name, last name, date of birth, that kind of stuff for contacts, but it also has an image component to it. If time allows, we will publish those images to Blob storage. And then if we're lucky, we'll start working on a content delivery network to be able to expose that and then run into applications insights. So enough about that. We're not at the finish line yet. We're just at the getting started. So let's take a look at this app and what we are going to do. So this is a pretty basic application. If I hit run, you'll notice I'm using JetBrains Writer and not Visual Studio. There was really no particular reason for it outside of I really like Writer now compared to Visual Studio, but I didn't say that live, but the world is watching. It just has a couple of benefits to it. I started my stream using my Mac, and the Writer really does have a cross-platform way of doing it. So here's our API endpoint. We have a context endpoint that just spit out a bunch of JSON, and then there's a viewer to it. Nothing major, a typical MVC app, but it's just going to show you the power of Azure to be able to deploy this in hopefully under 27 minutes. That's assuming also I don't make any mistakes along the way. So let's start off here. So the first step is I'm logged into the Azure portal. I did that ahead of time just to avoid any of the 2-factor authentication that I have set up for it. First thing I like to do whenever I'm creating an app, especially one for a presentation, is start off with creating a resource group. A resource group you can think of as a logical binding for your applications. It's a way to kind of group them together. Allows you to look at billing for them, also allows you to bulk delete them. So when this session is done, I can just come across and delete this. So I am going to call this a lab around Azure. And because I am in the US, in the western part of the country, I am going to choose West US to be a little bit faster for me. Click create, and within seconds that resource group is created. I can click on go to group and you'll see nothing here. So the first thing we want to do is to add what's called an app service plan. So an app service plan allows us to host applications. Think of it as like a virtual IIS box or a virtual Windows or Linux server that allows you to host more than one app. So we're going to create one that allows us to host our two applications. So when I click create, see it's automatically talks about my subscription and puts in the resource group since I created from there. Then we're going to give it a name. Let's call this, these names have to be unique. So sometimes you have to get a little creative. So I'm going to do LAA for lap around Azure and then API-app. Names don't necessarily mean anything. It's just more for logical how you figure it out. And I'm going to choose Windows for this just in case some of the libraries you might use might be Windows specific. In our case, it's not, but I'm more comfortable with Windows than Linux, so I just chose that. And then again, the region. You want to try to keep the regions in the same thing so you don't run into costs when it comes from going from one environment to the next. And then the type of server. So there's lots of different options and the cost varies tremendously on it. Luckily, Azure gives you kind of a little sample of roughly how much it would cost. The cheapest production box costs about $73 US a month and can go up as high as thousands. When you're just developing and testing, I recommend you go with either the F1, D1, or B1. I'm not going to do that for this because when I was running through these demos last night, these are usually shared resources and they're not guaranteed to be up. And while I'm doing a demo, I want to make sure they're up. So I choose one of the production mindsets and we're going to go with the cheaper S1 for now, which has more than enough power to run that simple app. Click review and create. Hopefully you get the green check mark that everything's there. I click create. In a couple of seconds, that will be done. Once it's done, we will go to the resource and start with our next one. Okay, it's done. I'm going to click go to resource. And then you'll see this section here called apps, and there are no apps to it. So you're good to go. Let's create the next app or the first app, which is going to be, as you could imagine, we are going to create what's called a web app. Whether it's an API or an application, this is essentially running Kestrel or IIS for you. We're going to click create, choose that resource group, give it a name. I am going to do la-web app, or let's do the API first. API-app, and I'm going to do it through code. I can publish a Docker container, but that's a little bit beyond what we're going to do. And this particular app is written with .NET Core 3.1, so I'm going to choose that. Windows, and let's go back. For some reason, it always defaults to Central, so let's do West. Narrow it down to West 2. Now it's going to look within West 2 to see if there's any existing app service I have, and I should have 3 in there. Context Web, which is what I've been using for my stream. La-API app, which is the one we just created, an LAT app service, which is what I created last night to make sure the demo worked. And in the event that we ran out of time or there was failures, I have a fallback. So let's go and create that. And this takes a couple of seconds once the validation passes. While that's happening, we're going to go and create the next one. And a lot of these you can actually create through Visual Studio Code, or JetBrains Writer. I'm just creating it here to show how you can do it in the portal. But you can also, as Mustafa mentioned, the real way you want to create infrastructure is through scripts using something like Terraform or the Azure Resource Manager, so it's repeatable and you don't make mistakes. But I like to learn from scratch. So this is the way I'm showing everyone else how to do it. La-web-app, Docker, still the same 3.1. Too bad there isn't a way to just go and copy. So I want an exact copy of this, just change the name. And then it's going under the law app. Click review and create. Click create. So once this is done, it's been 8 minutes now. I've created an app server and I've created, or in the process of creating, 2 web applications to go there. So we're almost there. Next thing we want to do is create a SQL Server instance. So I'm going to do new again and then search for Azure SQL. You can actually search for SQL, click create. Now this one's, the creation experience is a little bit different. It really just depends on your experience. But for this one, there's 3 different offerings that you have for SQL Server. There's SQL databases where I just want to create a database. I want to create a managed instance, meaning Microsoft/Azure. You're going to manage everything about this. This is typical when you want to grab an existing on-prem database and just say, here, Microsoft, you manage it. And then the SQL virtual machines is you really control everything about it. You get a machine that has SQL Server preloaded. You're responsible for the operating system updates, any updates to SQL Server. Easy demo, easy app. I'm going to go with SQL databases. First, we want to create a database server because we need the database server to host a database. And it defaulted to Presentations India because the last talk I was giving was supposed to be at C# Corner in India. And that's why that resource group is selected. So let's go, what do I call it? A lap around Azure. And we are going to give it a database name. Let's call it La SQL Server. Now, you notice I use La because when you're looking at the resources, it kind of sorts them for you by application. You can also do that by resource group, but this for me does a little bit better. Now you need to create an equivalent server administrator. And if you notice in the text, it says that this needs to be something other than a typical name. You can't use admin, administrators, SA, root, or anything that's commonly there. What they're trying to do is reduce the vector for your attacking. So I'm going to use Guadagno. And then for a password, type in something that you're going to remember. I use something like LastPass for my password so I can generate it. Since this is a demo here, I am going to use the typical demo password of password 1. And it doesn't matter that you know because I am going to destroy these instances right after the talk is done. So I'm going to do review and create. This one takes a little bit longer to do because it has to create a new virtual machine or find one that's available, throw it on there, and get it ready for you. So while that is happening, oh, there it is. It's done. That was quick. Oh, no, it was just accepted. So we are going to get ready to, next step is install the database to it. So we got the actual server. We're going to want to put our contacts database out here. Luckily, I have scripts for all that. So you're just going to see me copy and paste when we're ready. And this is just a lot of filler talk right now while this creates. I've thought about actually creating the database behind the scenes and just having it ready, but I thought it was important to see it. And I was able to pass the time enough to do it. So now I'm here, I can see everything there is about the database. I'm going to choose create database. And then it already has the subscription and resource selected, looking for a database name. So I am going to call it contacts. Then you need to choose the database like we did with the app server and the server itself. What kind of throughput do you want? The default is this general purpose one, which is a whopping $380 to run. If you go to like the most business critical, you're talking thousands of dollars an hour to run these. For our example, we are going to use just the basic and start off with the minimum of 100 meg because there's really nothing there. And that puts us around $5. I click apply. Review and create, and this should only take a couple of seconds, a minute at tops to create. Once it creates, we'll go to the resource page to get the basic connection info for it. Now it should be something like LA LA-SQL-server.Azure websites.data or databases.Azure websites. I forget the full syntax, but we'll see it here once this deployment step is done. And then we will jump over to Writer and do our database connections to get ready for the actual connection. So come on, Azure. It's always awkward when it's trying to run and you're in there. Let's see. Oh, my green screen cut out. Okay, now it's done. So let's go back to the code. Let's copy this out because we need the server name. So I'm going to hit copy, go to Writer, and Writer has a built-in database explorer. So let's go and create a new one. You can also do it from their Azure Explorer like you would do in SQL Server. Click on the SQL databases. Give it a second to refresh. And it should appear with 7 or 8 different databases, 5 of them. So this is the one we recently created, and I want to connect to the contact. So I'm going to right-click and choose Connect to Database and try to log in. And the reason why I said try to log in is because the login is going to be unsuccessful. And there's a reason for that. So as soon as I hit Connect, should try in a couple seconds, and then I'll get this message here that says this is specific database user password combination is rejected by the server, cannot open server, client with IP address is not, and then blah, 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 essentially saying that I did not allow, excuse me, or authorize this database to connect, which is true. Azure has a built-in firewall to SQL databases that only allow specific connections. So we are going to create a server firewall rule. If you notice within Azure or within Writer, if you were watching, where'd it go? When I right-clicked here, there was a set firewall rule, which allows you to do that. But I'm going to do it here only because there's another change we need to make. So set firewall rule, and then there's a simple add client IP right here that you'll click. You'll notice below it adds in a client IP address, which is my public IP. And what I typically do is just put in a name for it here, like home connection, just so I know in case there's other. Now, later on, we're going to want to expose this application or this database to other Azure services. So we're going to want to check this box here or say allow Azure resources and services to access this server. So I'm going to click yes to those, and that just saves us a step later on. So now that that is done, let's go back to our application and choose OK to see if it works now. I probably have to retype the password. Huh. Did I get the password wrong? I did this the other day. I got the password wrong like multiple times. And it looks like I got it wrong again. Da, 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 da. If I get it wrong, I'll just show you how to reset it. So test connection. Yep, I got it wrong. Oh, it still says the firewall was not there. The change probably didn't happen yet. Save. There it goes. Oof. And usually it doesn't take that long to actually save. So now let me go back. It wasn't me mistyping the password. It was just Azure was not ready for me. Now I click OK. Test passed successfully. I click OK. And I am ready to access database. There's nothing there, so I am going to run a couple of scripts just to get our database there. So let's open a query console. You can do this in SQL Server Manager, Azure Data Studio, Visual Studio Code, whatever your poison is. You can even actually do this online in Azure. So I am going to run a quick test, and my eyes are looking at a different screen because I am copying some text. So this is everything we need to do to create the schema. I could have done a backup and a restore, but that's pretty complicated. I want to make this sample something that everyone could follow along, so you can recreate this database and everything as needed. So in a couple of seconds, we're done. Now I want to create the user. So for that, there's 2 steps for creating the user. So let's get rid of all this text. It's the user. This needs to be done in master. Don't worry about the password. Like I said, I'm deleting this database and everything else after this talk. Click run. That's done. Now I want to create a local user and give it the rights. The reason why these are done in multiple scripts is because the Azure client doesn't support, or the Azure database doesn't support you being able to change databases on the same connection. So what's happening behind the scenes is Writer, in this particular case, is creating a new connection because I am changing the database that I'm going to, as you kind of noticed here. So I can't do any use statements inside of the IDE. And I do this, our user's created, it's got DB reader and write access. I do this so that it doesn't have the super SA user to it. Now the last step is for me to populate it with some data, and I'm only populating 2 of the tables with it. If I can only copy the text, you'll see we're populating the context table and the phone table. Control A to run them all, run it. So now it's done. So now I have the database up there. Database is populated. I should be able to come here and do jump to query, and let's do a new one and do select star from contacts, and should see I have 4 or 5 contacts in there. So database is good, and this is going out to the cloud. So now that we are done with that, the next step for us is to publish the API. Now, publishing the API, there's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different thousand ways of doing it. I like to try to stay within my environment. So here I'm staying within Rider, just like you can stay within Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio proper and do it. There is an ability for me to right click and choose publish, which is what I'm going to do now. And then there's a publish to Azure, which I am going to pick. And then it wants to know if I'm going to use an existing app or create a new web app. So this is where I could have actually created those web apps ahead of time, or not created them, but actually created them physically from here. So if I expand this dialog box a little bit, you'll see all the different applications. And I should see Law API app right there. And I am going to open it in a browser after publish and click run. And then you'll notice down here, it's starting to build it. Now it's building a zip using the Azure Resource API. It's going to upload that zip, and then it'll give me a URL that I could get to validate it works. So I think I clicked open it up, but if not, let's go and open it up. And if I configured it correctly, it should fail. And it does fail. And it fails for a reason. Problem is there's no settings to it, so it doesn't know what to connect to the database, because I have all the app settings as blank in production, because I want us to create them on the server, and I don't want them checked into source at all. So this is just the shell for Visual Studio or .NET Core to be able to access them. So we're going to go and do all the settings afterwards. Let's go and migrate the web app, and then do the same step for that. Do publish to Azure, search for that web branch, which should be the next one down from here, and then do run. This time I'm not going to select open in browser because we know it's going to fail. So while that's happening, let's go back to the portal and take a quick look at some of the settings that we need to change. Here's the portal. So we're going to go to home and then look for La app, which is not in my most recent, which is weird because it was a most recent, but I don't understand the real how that works. But if I click on apps here, I should be able to get to it pretty easy. And then the configuration is here, and you'll notice you get like a grid-like look to create. And pardon me, to save some time, I am going to copy and paste some of that data. So the only one we really need for this is a new connection string that we will call contacts database SQL Server. And then if I have everything else correct, I'm going to paste this string, but the password is different in this one. I didn't put in the 0. And then choose SQL Server. I'll show you where to get this. It's pretty easy to get that connection string. Azure actually provides it. So if I do open a new tab, just so we don't lose our place there, and can go through some of the connections. I can click there for contacts. There's a show connection strings right here where I can click copy and it will copy the ADO.NET or the ASP way of connecting. But I had it on the clipboard because we've already used it before. I think that's all the connections we need for this. So let's click save, click continue. As a result of the save, it's going to restart the database, or sorry, restart the API app. Once that's done, I can come back to this page where we tried to view it and then do contacts because that's the endpoint name. Try it, and if I got everything correct in the first shot, which would be a first, we should have access to it. And it says this page can't currently handle the request, and I get a 500 error. So let's see if it actually already refreshed. Let's make sure our database string is correct. Oh, it did not work because, actually, no, the API should have worked. So let's take a quick look. While you're testing, it's easy to do something like this. So I am changing my environment to say development. This will give me that old typical yellow screen of death that you used to get with ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET, but they didn't like the color yellow, so they went away from that. So I'm going to click save, continue. Now I'm pretending it's a development environment, which kids don't try this at home. You shouldn't do when you are working in a real app. We're just doing this to kind of show you a debugging way of testing when you're not in prod and to figure out what I missed. Takes a second because it's got to respin up the service. And the login failed for contact users. I must have the password wrong. Let's see what I did for the password. Oh, did I created a user with password. So I did have the right password. I changed it in the connection string, which I shouldn't have. My apologies. So let's go back to our Azure portal, change this. I thought I actually changed this code, but we didn't. So I'm going to click edit. And this password really is password. Now there's other ways of doing it. You can use managed identity, but I didn't want to throw too many new things at you all at once. So let's hit save, continue. While that goes, I'm going to do a quick peek over to see if they want me to wrap up since we're getting into the time that my talk was supposed to be done. And so far, no comments from them. So let's go back here, do a refresh. And if everything is fine, I should be able to connect. And there, now I have my API. So let's get the database working. We got the database working. Let's get the API up, or the web app up. And it should need like 2 more minutes to do this. And then we're going to have to create a blob container for this to work. So let's go to publish. Well, actually, I already published it. We need to do the permissions for it. Where are you? That one. Let's go to home. Choose our app service plan since the web is not there. Choose web. This one needs a couple of more points. So I need to create a setting called API root. So go to configuration. There is a way you can do this through the IDE. It's just a little bit hard to do in Writer. In Visual Studio, you can right-click and upload them all, which is a nice little feature. But again, your users should not really know. So this really should be, these connections should be in Azure app configuration. I think it's called Azure Configuration Service now, or in Key Vault. But since this is a demo, we break all the rules in a demo. We're going to leave this blank for now because we don't have the storage account created. Then we need to create the container name, setting, and then this is going to be contact-images. As you can see, I've done this demo once or twice because I have different IntelliSense coming up. And then the last one is image URI. And this wants the fully connected string. So I am hoping this is available so I don't have to come back and type it. I hit save. I still can't run it because this app is dependent on having the blob storage. So let's go and create a blob storage really quick. So I'm going to do new storage account, create, and then you get a lot of the same stuff. And let's do what I call it, la storage. It's now fancy, or it's French. And then we're going to choose standard storage. The only thing we're going to change is this read access. All these options, like everything else, have a cost incurred to it. This is the cheapest and most cost-effective option. You have an option of cold or hot. If you're planning any real-time access to data, you want hot. Cold is for things like archives, backups, and things you don't need like instantaneous response for. So I'm going to click review and create. Validation passes. So now I just create it. Man, I feel like I'm talking 1,000 miles a minute. Once this is done, we're going to create the container and then create the blob. Then I'm going to copy out the access tokens to it and provide that to the application. Then we should be good to go. So we're good here. Let's go to containers and then create a container. And then we call this container, I think it was contact images. Contact image, oh, I gotta do it here. Contact dash images and public access level for now because we want to access this directly from the browser. We're going to choose Blob anonymous read only. Typically you'd want private and then set up the Azure identity to have access to it. But because we are running out of time and that's a little bit more complicated, we're just going to create that. Now, in order to get that, we need to have an access key. So I am going to copy this. An access key is kind of like the credentials. If you think in the OAuth way, this says, I authorize this user. Don't try this at home. Don't ever give out both your keys. You only get 2 keys. If one gets stolen, you have to kind of regenerate them. But like I said, everything from this resource is going to be disabled once I do it, so I don't mind that everyone sees it right now. Now I'm going to go and edit this, paste in the code, click OK, click Save. Now, if I configured everything right, if I go to the viewer app, which should be this web app, I'm going to go to the overview and click on the API, fingers crossed. It loads, I click containers, or I click contacts. That goes out to the database. Right now, this is calling the API, which is calling the service and did it. Let's go and edit a picture. I should get a contact here. As you see, last time I tested this was localhost. So let's go and browse and upload, and let's pick Monopoly Joe. My team loves to Photoshop my face into different pictures. I click upload, and there is Monopoly Man that is now in the container. And where are we? If we go to more tools, developer tools, if I inspect this element, you should see here that it is coming from lawstorage.blob.core.azure.net/contact images. So it saved it, uploaded it, pulled it into its own container, and it is good to go. Stephen, I am ready to be joined back into the talk. I will be bringing all of this back to on GitHub over the weekend, so you will have access to the code and the scripts to try this out for yourself.